Welcome to the moment when everything seemed divine, yet behind that holy light hid shadows darker than sin itself. Tonight we descend into the chilling world of 10 preachers, once worshipped as living gods, whose halos cracked open to reveal monsters within. These are stories of faith turned to fear, devotion turned to destruction, and power wrapped in prayer. Let's begin in silence. Have you ever noticed? The more you try to win someone's love, the further they seem to drift. You do everything, say the right words, act the right way, and yet, somehow, the very energy of wanting drives them away. Today we'll uncover why. 5 hidden rules of attraction, whispered by the silence of Alan Watts, that reveal why the most magnetic men are the ones who never chase. You see, love is not a transaction. It is not a game of strategy, nor a checklist of behaviors. It is a rhythm, a dance of energy between two beings. But most people never hear the music because their minds are too loud with wanting. In this quiet exploration, we will uncover how stillness, presence, and freedom make you irresistible. Not by manipulation, but by alignment. Have you ever noticed how the harder you try to make someone love you, the more they seem to slip away? You do everything right. You call, you text, you compliment, you try to show your best side, yet somehow the more effort you give, the colder their response becomes. It's strange, isn't it? Almost cruel. But in truth, this is not cruelty. It's a reflection of the universal rhythm of desire itself. Alan Watts once said that when you try to grasp water too tightly, it slips through your fingers. The same applies to love. When we chase it desperately, we crush it under the weight of our wanting. Desire in its purest form is beautiful. It's the spark of life, the longing that pulls us toward connection, art, creation. But when that desire becomes desperate, when we believe that without this person, we are incomplete, it transforms from light to shadow. It no longer draws someone in, it drives them away. You see, the energy of need is heavy, it suffocates. And no one, man or woman, is drawn to a person who radiates lack. Imagine you're standing before a fire. You can feel its warmth, the dance of its flames. But if you try to clutch that fire, to hold it in your hands, it burns and disappears. That's how human connection works. The moment you attempt to possess it, it turns to smoke. Love thrives in space, in breath, in the unspoken dance between wanting and allowing. When a man chases a woman from fear, fear of being alone, fear of losing her, fear of not being enough, that fear becomes the language his energy speaks. He might smile, say the right words, even make her laugh, but underneath there's a vibration of insecurity. And women, whether they realize it or not, feel that. They sense it like an instinct. It tells them, this man doesn't stand rooted in himself. He needs me to complete him. And that need, my friend, is the death of attraction. Now contrast that with another kind of man, one who desires, yes, but lightly. He looks at a woman and sees beauty, feels attraction, but he doesn't lose himself in it. He doesn't project his worth onto her reaction. His desire is like a soft breeze. It touches, it tempts, but it never clings. This is the paradox. The less you chase, the more you attract. Because when you are whole within yourself, desire becomes play, not desperation. In the teachings of Alan Watts, there's this idea that all striving is, at its core, resistance to what is. When you chase love, you declare to the universe that love is something you do not have. And the universe, always obedient, gives you more of that experience, the experience of lacking love. But when you let go, when you act from a state of fullness, life begins to mirror that abundance back to you. It's not about pretending you don't care. Indifference is not strength. It's another mask of fear. True power lies in wanting without attachment. To desire someone and yet be at peace if they walk away, that is mastery, that is freedom. When a woman feels that kind of energy, she feels something rare, she feels safe, because you are not demanding anything from her. You are simply sharing your presence, and presence is the highest form of attraction there is. The paradox of desire teaches us that love is not a goal to be hunted, but a melody to be played. When you chase the note, it vanishes. When you let the music flow, it fills the room. So instead of asking, how can I make her want me, ask, how can I be so at peace with myself that my energy becomes magnetic on its own? That shift, from taking to being, changes everything. The truth is, you don't attract love by searching for it. You attract it by becoming it. You attract confidence by embodying it. You attract peace by living in it. And once you understand that, desire stops being a trap and becomes a dance. A dance where you no longer move out of need, but out of joy, out of curiosity, out of the simple beauty of being alive and open. Because when you let go of the chase, when you release the need to possess, love begins to come to you, quietly, naturally, effortlessly, like the tide returning to the shore. The power of emptiness. We live in a world obsessed with showing off. Everyone is trying to prove something, how smart they are, how successful, how desirable. Men especially have been taught that to win love, they must perform. They must show confidence, power, wealth, charm, humor, as if affection were a trophy handed to the one with the most impressive display. But beneath all that effort lies fear, the fear of not being enough as you are. And this fear is precisely what women feel when they meet a man. It is invisible, but it speaks louder than any words. Alan Watts once said, "When you stop trying to be something, you become everything." That is the power of emptiness. Emptiness is not weakness. It is not silence born of insecurity. It is the space from which authenticity emerges. Think about it. When you enter a room full of people who are all trying to impress, there's chaos in the air. Everyone's energy is reaching outward, desperate to be seen. But then there's that one person who isn't trying. He's not performing, not calculating, not grasping for attention. He simply is, and without saying a word, people are drawn to him. His stillness speaks, his silence commands respect. That is the magnetic power of emptiness, the quiet confidence of someone who has nothing to prove. Women, by nature, sense this authenticity deeply. They are not just attracted to what you say, but to what you radiate. When you are filled with the noise of trying to sound interesting, trying to seem strong, trying to be the man she wants, your energy becomes restless. You are no longer real. But when you strip away the noise, when you stand comfortably in the silence of your own being, your presence becomes powerful. You see, the man who doesn't need to fill the silence is the man who has mastered it. Alan Watts often spoke of the beauty of space, the pause between musical notes that allows the melody to breathe. In life, as in love, that space is what gives meaning to the sound. When you constantly try to fill that space with words, achievements, and validation, you rob it of its beauty. But when you allow emptiness to exist, when you allow silence to do the talking, something profound happens. People begin to lean in. They want to know what you're thinking, what you're feeling, because you're not spilling it everywhere. You've become mysterious, not by trying to hide, but by being at peace with saying nothing. In the modern dating world, emptiness is rare. Everyone is busy crafting their identity, their image, their highlight reel, their online persona. But underneath all that noise, real connection is starving. The truth is, women don't fall for the man who tries the hardest. They fall for the man who feels the least need to try, because his energy says, "I am enough as I am." And that statement, though unspoken, is incredibly seductive. It tells her that she doesn't need to perform either. It gives her permission to be real. And when two people meet without masks, attraction becomes effortless. This is the paradox. The less you fill yourself with the need to prove, the more space you create for others to enter. Emptiness isn't the absence of value, it's the presence of potential. Just as a cup holds water only because it is empty, a man holds love only when he creates space for it. If you're too full of your own noise, your ego, your insecurity, your plans to impress, there's no room for connection to breathe. But when you're empty, when you allow yourself to simply be, others find comfort in your stillness. They feel safe, understood, seen, even if you've said nothing at all. Imagine for a moment that you're sitting across from a woman. She's speaking, laughing, watching your face for reaction. Most men would be waiting for their turn to respond, to say something clever, to maintain her attention. But the man who understands the power of emptiness doesn't rush. He listens fully. He's not performing in his mind. He's simply there. And because he's fully present, she feels it. The energy shifts. The conversation slows. The space between words becomes charged, alive. That's when connection happens. Not in the words, but in the silence between them. True attraction isn't created by effort. It's revealed by presence, and presence only arises when the mind is quiet. When you no longer need to prove who you are, when you stop reaching outward for validation and begin to rest in the peace of your own being. That is what women are drawn to. Not the performance, not the show, but the man who has learned the art of being empty yet whole, silent yet powerful, calm yet deeply alive. Because emptiness is not about losing yourself, it's about letting go of the false self, the image, the performance, the noise, so that your true essence can finally be felt. And when a woman feels that, when she senses the peace in your stillness, she can't help but be drawn closer, not because you're trying to pull her in, but because you've created the quiet space where attraction naturally grows. In a world where everyone is loud, restless, and constantly performing, silence has become the rarest form of power. People talk endlessly about confidence, but few understand what it really means. True confidence isn't found in dominance or charm or the loud assertion of strength. It's found in stillness, in the quiet steadiness of a man who knows who he is, even when the world tries to shake him. Alan Watts often spoke of water, soft, yielding, yet capable of wearing down mountains. Emotional stillness works the same way. It isn't forceful, but its impact is undeniable. When a man can remain calm in chaos, when he can feel emotion without being consumed by it, something extraordinary happens. He becomes unshakable. Women sense it instinctively. It's not about suppressing emotion, it's about mastering the storm within. When you meet someone who radiates that quiet peace, you feel it before they speak. Their presence slows you down, grounds you, makes you breathe differently. That's emotional stillness. A strength so subtle it doesn't need to announce itself. Most men, when faced with attraction, lose this stillness completely. They become anxious, calculating every move, every word, every reaction. Their mind starts to race. Does she like me? Should I text her? What if she leaves? That inner noise is what pushes her away, not the words themselves. Because emotional chaos is contagious. If your energy is uncertain, she will mirror it. But when your energy is calm, she feels safe in your presence. You become the eye of the storm, still, centered, unwavering. You see, women don't fall for the man who always knows what to say. They fall for the man who makes them feel something different. Peace. In a world that constantly pulls at their emotions, peace is the rarest gift you can offer, and that peace begins with emotional stillness, when you no longer need to prove, when you no longer react to every shift in her tone, when you stop trying to control every outcome. Your energy changes. You move from need to knowing. And that knowing draws people in effortlessly. Alan Watts once said that we suffer because we take our thoughts too seriously. The man who learns to watch his thoughts instead of obeying them gains control over his emotions. When you feel jealousy, doubt, or fear rising inside you, don't fight them, don't suppress them. Simply observe. Watch how they come and go like waves on the surface of the sea. Beneath those waves, the ocean remains still. That stillness is your true nature, calm, deep, unchanging. The more you live from that place, the more magnetic you become. Women can sense when a man's emotions control him. They can feel when his confidence is fragile, when his calm is just a mask for insecurity. But they can also feel when it's real, when he's anchored in himself. That authenticity can't be faked because it shows up in the smallest ways. The way you listen instead of rush to speak, the way you pause before reacting, the way you stay composed when something doesn't go your way. That is emotional stillness in motion. Think about it. Most people seek connection out of fear. Fear of being alone, fear of not being enough, fear of being rejected. But when you live in stillness, connection becomes an extension of your peace, not an escape from your loneliness. You no longer approach relationships from emptiness. You approach them from fullness. You don't need her to complete you. You choose to share your completeness with her. That energy of not needing but choosing is what transforms attraction into admiration. But there's something profoundly powerful about a man who doesn't react impulsively. A man who can smile in discomfort, who can listen to criticism without collapsing, who can stay grounded when others lose control. That kind of energy makes people trust you. It makes women feel safe because you're not ruled by chaos. You've become the calm center they can lean on. And when a woman feels emotionally safe, she opens up naturally. She doesn't have to protect herself. She can relax into your presence. Emotional stillness is not about being emotionless. It's about feeling everything deeply, but letting nothing own you. You can experience anger without aggression, love without possession, sadness without despair. You no longer swing between extremes. You move with balance, and in that balance, attraction thrives. Because a still mind radiates confidence, and a confident man radiates peace. When you cultivate that peace, your energy begins to change. People start treating you differently. Women look at you longer, not because of how you look, but because of how you make them feel calm, safe, present. That's what emotional stillness does. It removes the noise, the desperation, the chaos that repels, and replaces it with quiet strength that draws people in. In the end, emotional stillness is the invisible force that makes a man unforgettable. Not because he dominates a room, but because his silence speaks louder than anyone else's words. Because when you master your emotions, you master your presence. And your presence becomes something no one can ignore. There's a strange truth about love. The more you try to hold on to it, the faster it slips away. It's almost like sand in your hands. The tighter your grip, the more it escapes between your fingers. And yet we keep gripping, keep holding, keep trying to control what was never meant to be controlled. Alan Watts once said, "To let go is to be free." But we don't like letting go, do we? Because letting go feels like losing. And so we cling to people, to feelings, to the idea of how things should be, until the beauty of what we loved begins to fade under the weight of our own fear. In love, attachment often hides behind the mask of care. You tell yourself you're protecting what you have, nurturing it, giving it attention. But underneath, there's fear. Fear that if you loosen your hold, it might disappear. And that fear becomes poison. It turns affection into control, passion into pressure. When you cling to someone, you're no longer loving them. You're trying to possess them. And possession is the opposite of love. True love, the kind that grows and breathes, requires freedom. Women feel it instantly when a man clings. When his energy becomes anxious, when every word, every action is measured by her reaction, she starts to pull away. Not because she doesn't care, but because she can no longer breathe. A woman's attraction is like a flame. It needs air to survive. When you try to trap it, it dies. The man who understands detachment knows this. He doesn't hold love like a chain. He holds it like an open palm. He allows it to move freely, trusting that what's real will stay and what isn't meant for him will go. Detachment doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean coldness or emotional distance. It means you stop trying to control outcomes. You stop making another person the source of your happiness. You stop demanding that love behave a certain way. When you do that, something powerful happens. The pressure disappears. The energy shifts from desperation to peace. And peace, unlike control, attracts. Alan Watts spoke often about the illusion of control. He said that life is not a problem to be solved, but a process to be experienced. Love works the same way. You cannot strategize it, cannot script it, cannot make it obey your will. It is something to be experienced, to be felt, moment by moment, without grasping. When you stop trying to control love, you begin to actually feel it, because now your focus is not on keeping it, but on appreciating it. Most men make the mistake of trying to secure love through constant pursuit, through reassurance, through testing, through endless effort. They think if they can just do enough, say enough, be enough, the woman will stay. But that mindset is rooted in fear, and fear kills attraction. A woman doesn't want to feel like she's being chased by anxiety. She wants to feel like she's being invited into peace. And that invitation only comes from a man who's not afraid to lose her, because he understands something deeper. That love, when forced, becomes a cage, but when freed, becomes a choice. Detachment gives love room to breathe. It allows both people to remain themselves. It respects individuality instead of trying to mold it. When a man lives with this energy, women notice. He becomes unpredictable, not because he's playing games, but because he's living freely. His happiness isn't dependent on anyone's approval. He can give affection without needing it back, and that independence is intoxicating. You see, when you detach, you shift from needing love to attracting it. You're no longer trying to take. You're simply being. You're no longer hunting, you're radiating. That's why people who are genuinely content with themselves always seem to attract more. They're not trying to fill a void, they're overflowing. And that overflow becomes magnetic. Imagine a dance, one where both partners move with rhythm and grace, not trying to lead or control, but flowing together. That's how real love feels when detachment is present. There's a rhythm, a balance, a freedom that allows connection to stay alive, because both people are choosing to dance, not out of fear of being alone, but out of joy in the moment. When you stop clinging, you begin to trust. You trust that what's meant for you will find its way. You trust that losing something doesn't mean losing yourself. You trust that love isn't a possession to guard, but a journey to experience. And in that trust, you discover a strange irony. The less you need to keep someone, the more they want to stay. Because people are not drawn to cages, they're drawn to freedom. And when a woman feels that you can love her without trying to own her, she feels something rare. Safety without control, passion without pressure, love without fear. That is the dance of detachment. Not the absence of love, but the presence of peace within it. It's the understanding that love doesn't belong to you. It moves through you, and when you stop chasing it, you finally start to feel it.
In the quiet town of Marshfield, Wisconsin, stood a small farmhouse surrounded by endless fields of golden wheat. To outsiders, it was peaceful, almost picture-perfect, but on one cold November morning in 1984, that house became the stage of one of the most gruesome family massacres the state had ever seen. The Schmidt family, a family of 5, was found brutally murdered inside their own home. No sign of forced entry. No neighbors heard a thing. Just silence and blood. What unfolded after that discovery would shock investigators, haunt the community for decades, and reveal the disturbing truth hiding behind the walls of that farmhouse. They say small towns are built on trust. On quiet mornings, friendly waves, and familiar faces. But in the town of Marshfield, Wisconsin, trust would become the very thing that died first. It was November 12th, 1984. The air was bitter, the kind that makes your breath linger like smoke, and inside a small farmhouse on the outskirts of town, the Schmidt family prepared for what should have been an ordinary night. Harold Schmidt, a 42-year-old mechanic known for his steady hands and hard work, had just returned home from a long day at the garage. His wife, Linda, a teacher at the local elementary school, was cooking dinner while their children, Eric, 15, Megan, 12, and little Ryan, just 8 years old, set the table. From the outside, everything seemed normal. The porch light flickered, casting a soft glow over the frosted grass. A family dog barked in the distance. It was one of those peaceful scenes you could paint and hang on a wall. Nothing out of place, nothing unusual. But sometimes horror hides in the ordinary. Sometimes evil walks quietly through unlocked doors. At 9:17 p.m., the Schmidts' nearest neighbor remembered hearing what sounded like a door slam. He thought nothing of it. After all, rural homes often creak and groan with the wind. What he didn't know was that, at that very moment, an uninvited figure had already stepped inside the Schmidt home. Someone who knew them. Someone who once shared their bloodline. The night grew colder. The lights in the Schmidt house dimmed one by one. But behind those walls, something unthinkable was unfolding. Investigators would later call it a crime of quiet rage. A slaughter that lasted less than 20 minutes, but would haunt the town for generations. The next morning, just after sunrise, the mail carrier noticed something strange. The front door of the Schmidt home was slightly ajar. Swaying gently in the wind, the dog barked endlessly, its chain pulled taut. Out of concern, the carrier approached, calling out for Harold or Linda. No answer, only silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, unnatural. He took a step inside. And what he saw next would stay with him for the rest of his life. Harold Schmidt was lying near the living room sofa, his body twisted unnaturally, a dark stain spreading across the floorboards. The shotgun blast had been precise, close range, fatal instantly. The television still hummed in the background, a static buzz that made the scene feel even more unreal. In the kitchen, Linda lay face down beside a shattered coffee mug, her hands covered in deep defensive wounds. She had fought for her life, for her children, but she hadn't stood a chance. Upstairs, officers found what one detective later described as the most haunting scene of his career. The children were in their beds, as if still asleep, each one shot once, execution style, without even time to wake. Their small rooms, posters on the walls, toys scattered on the floor, stood frozen in time. A snapshot of innocence destroyed in the most violent way imaginable. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no shattered windows, nothing stolen. This wasn't a robbery. This was personal. The killer had moved through that house with purpose, knowing exactly where each family member would be. It was rage turned methodical, a storm of hatred masked by cold calculation. When police began their investigation, the town went into collective shock. Marshfield had never seen anything like it. Doors that were once left unlocked were now bolted shut. Neighbors who used to greet each other over fences now avoided eye contact. It was as if everyone suddenly realized that evil didn't always wear a stranger's face. It could wear the face of family. Detectives scoured every inch of the property. They found Harold's wallet still on the kitchen counter, his tools neatly stacked in the garage, Linda's school papers organized on the dining table. But one detail stood out, a faint boot print near the back door. It was smeared in blood. But the size, the shape, it was enough to suggest the killer wasn't a stranger wandering in the night. The autopsies confirmed what investigators feared. The family was killed between 10 p.m. and midnight. Harold first, then Linda, then the children, one by one. It was efficient, controlled, almost rehearsed. Whoever did it had been there before, knew the layout of the home, and moved without hesitation. Within hours, the media swarmed the town. Reporters called it the Marshfield Massacre. Headlines spoke of nightmare in Wisconsin's heartland. But for those who knew the Schmidts, it wasn't a headline. It was heartbreak. Harold had grown up there, fixed the locals' cars, helped neighbors plow snow in the winter. Linda had taught half the children in the community how to read. And now, their entire family was gone, wiped out in one night of unimaginable brutality. As investigators pieced together the timeline, they began to suspect that this wasn't random. Someone had a score to settle. Someone who knew the Schmidts well enough to enter without fear, to move through that house like it was their own. A few neighbors mentioned a familiar face seen around town recently. Someone who hadn't been there in years. Harold's brother, Thomas Schmidt. The black sheep of the family. The ex-con. The one Harold hadn't spoken to in over a decade. And that was when the story began to twist. Because beneath the image of the perfect small-town family, there were secrets. Buried grudges. Old betrayals that had never truly died. The massacre wasn't random at all. It was personal, terrifyingly, intimately personal. That night of silence wasn't just a murder. It was a reckoning long in the making. A storm that had been gathering for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. And when it did, it left nothing but ghosts behind. When investigators stepped into the Schmidt house that morning, they didn't just find a massacre. They found secrets, quiet, festering secrets that painted a different picture of the family everyone thought they knew. The headlines had already begun calling it "The Night Evil Came to Marshfield." But as detectives peeled back the layers, they realized the evil didn't come from the outside. It was born within. Harold Schmidt had always been seen as a hardworking man. The kind of husband who mowed the lawn on Sundays and fixed his neighbors' engines for free. But inside that garage of his, behind the stacks of oil cans and broken wrenches, police discovered something that didn't fit the image. Hidden in a locked drawer was a small, leather-bound notebook. The first few pages looked ordinary. Sketches, repair notes, small reminders. But further in, the handwriting changed, shaky, erratic, the words darker. "I can't sleep," one entry read. "Is out there, watching again. Every night feels closer." Another, "I should have never trusted him again. It's my fault he hates me." The name wasn't written, just him, over and over. As if even writing it out felt dangerous, detectives began digging into Harold's past. And what they found made the puzzle far more twisted than anyone expected. 10 years earlier, Harold's younger brother, Thomas Schmidt, had been sentenced to 10 years in prison for armed robbery. What most people didn't know was that Harold had been there that night, driving the getaway car. But when the two were caught, only Thomas went to prison. Harold testified against him in exchange for a lighter sentence. A deal that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The brothers had once been inseparable, grew up in the same small house, shared the same room, even worked side by side in their father's old workshop. But money and betrayal had turned that brotherhood into hatred, and that hatred never healed. When Thomas got out of prison 6 months before the murders, he was a man hollowed by time and rage. He'd written letters to Harold, but they were never answered. He'd shown up at family gatherings only to be turned away. Harold had moved on, or at least tried to. He had his family, his job, his home. But to Thomas, it wasn't forgiveness. It was theft. Harold had stolen his life, his years, and now he wanted them back. Neighbors remembered seeing a truck idling near the Schmidt property in the weeks leading up to the murders. At first, no one thought much of it. In a town where everyone recognized each other's cars, it was easy to overlook. But when detectives found tire impressions near the Schmidt farmhouse, they matched perfectly with the treads of Thomas's old Chevy pickup. Then came the fingerprints. One, faint but clear, on the back door handle, belonging to Thomas Schmidt. That was the moment everything clicked. The paranoia in Harold's notebook wasn't random. He knew someone was watching him. He just didn't know how close that someone had already come. Friends of Linda, Harold's wife, told police that she'd been acting strangely in the weeks before the murders. Nervous. Distracted. She told a coworker that Harold had been having nightmares. Waking up drenched in sweat, convinced he heard footsteps outside. She said he'd started locking the doors twice, leaving the lights on in the hallway, even checking the windows before bed. He never said why, but Linda suspected it had to do with his brother. The deeper investigators dug, the more they realized this wasn't just a story of family rivalry. It was guilt. Guilt that had eaten away at Harold for years. The journal entries showed a man who felt his past closing in on him. He wrote about debts unpaid, things undone, voices in the dark. He believed someone was coming for him, and he was right. When police visited Thomas's small rental home on the edge of town, they found what one detective described as a shrine to resentment. Newspaper clippings of the Schmidt family, a copy of the trial transcript from 10 years earlier, and a single photograph. Harold and Thomas together as kids, their arms around each other. Someone had drawn a line down the middle of the photo, slicing their faces apart. The same kind of line that would, years later, divide the family forever. But it wasn't just the brothers' feud that shocked investigators. There was another layer, a quiet tension between Harold and Linda that had gone unnoticed by everyone around them. Financial records showed that Harold was deep in debt. The garage was failing, and the bank was threatening foreclosure. Yet Linda's paycheck, every cent, was being deposited into a separate account that Harold didn't have access to. When questioned, her coworkers revealed she had plans to leave him. She'd even spoken to a lawyer. The night before the murders, Linda reportedly called her sister crying. She said Harold had been pacing the house for hours, muttering about Thomas showing up again. She said he told her, "If he comes here, it'll end tonight." Those were the last words anyone heard from her. When the police pieced all of this together, the story transformed from a simple family tragedy into something far darker. A web of betrayal, fear, and revenge that had been building for years. Harold wasn't the innocent victim everyone thought he was. He was a man haunted by his own decisions. A man who'd betrayed his own blood and lived every day waiting for that betrayal to come back to his doorstep. And when Thomas returned, he didn't come with forgiveness. He came with fury. That small farmhouse in Marshfield was never just a home. It was a powder keg of secrets, old wounds that had never healed, sins that had never been confessed, and a storm of rage waiting for one spark to ignite it all. That spark came the night the Schmidts went to sleep. Unaware that the past they had buried was finally coming home. When Thomas Schmidt sat in the interrogation room for the first time, he didn't look like a killer. He looked tired, almost hollow. A man whose eyes had seen too many nights behind bars and too few chances at redemption. But as detectives pressed him, the calm began to crack, and the story that spilled out was darker than anyone expected. He said he'd gone to see his brother Harold that night to make things right. He said they'd argued, but he left before anything happened. He swore he hadn't touched anyone in that house. But the truth was bleeding out from every corner of the crime scene. The shotgun shells found in the living room matched the ammunition from a box in Thomas's truck. The tire marks behind the property matched his vehicle exactly. And the boot print near the back door was the same size, the same wear pattern, as the boots Thomas had been wearing when he was arrested. Forensic evidence doesn't lie. It only whispers what people try to hide. Detectives knew they had their man, but what they didn't know, what they couldn't yet understand, was why. Why kill not only his brother, but the innocent family that had nothing to do with the betrayal of years past. Why destroy every trace of the life Harold had built? When the questioning turned to motive, Thomas's voice changed. The calmness evaporated, replaced with something sharp, something venomous. He said Harold stole everything. Not just money, not just years, but his future. He said Harold betrayed him, lied to the courts, took the deal that should have been his. And when he came home from prison, he expected one thing: an apology. But Harold wouldn't even open the door. In his mind, the night of November 12th wasn't murder. It was payback. It was justice. Prosecutors would later call it revenge painted in blood. Thomas told police that when he arrived at the house that night, Harold was already awake. The two argued in the living room, voices low at first, then rising. Neighbors heard nothing. The farmhouse sat far from the road, surrounded by trees that swallowed sound. When Harold reached for the phone, Thomas said something inside him broke. Years of humiliation, rejection, and rage erupted all at once. The shotgun went off. One pull of the trigger, and his brother fell. But once that first shot echoed through the house, there was no turning back. Linda rushed in from the kitchen, screaming. Thomas said he didn't remember pulling the trigger again, but he did, again and again. By the time silence returned, the entire house was soaked in it. Upstairs, the children were still asleep. He didn't have to go there. He could have stopped. But something in him decided there would be no survivors. No witnesses. No reminders of Harold's so-called perfect life. He moved through each room with mechanical precision. One shot, then another, until the only sound left was the creak of floorboards and his own breath. Detectives said his confession wasn't just chilling. It was detached, emotionless. He described it like he was recounting a memory that didn't belong to him. No remorse, no sorrow, only justification. During the trial, the courtroom was packed. The entire town of Marshfield came to watch. Reporters filled every seat. They wanted to see the man who had turned brotherhood into bloodshed. When Thomas was led in, wearing a gray prison uniform, he stared straight ahead, never once looking toward the gallery where Harold and Linda's surviving relatives sat. The prosecution presented its case with brutal clarity. They laid out the evidence, the fingerprints, the ammunition, the confession, the motive. They painted Thomas as a man consumed by hatred, someone who let revenge rot his humanity until nothing was left. The defense tried to argue diminished capacity, claiming Thomas had suffered psychological trauma from his years in prison, that he wasn't in control that night. But the jury didn't buy it. Not when faced with what he had done to those children. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty on 5 counts of first-degree murder. Life imprisonment without parole. But it wasn't the verdict that broke the courtroom's silence. It was what Thomas said after. When the judge asked if he had any final words before sentencing, Thomas leaned into the microphone and said, "He took my life first. I just gave it back." A single sentence, cold, bitter final. Even behind bars, Thomas never expressed regret. He became withdrawn, barely speaking to anyone. In prison, he earned a reputation as a ghost. Someone who ate alone, who never joined conversations, who spent hours staring at the wall of his cell. The guards said sometimes they'd hear him talking to himself, mumbling things no one could make out. One inmate swore he heard Thomas say, "It's quiet again." They're all quiet now. Outside those prison walls, the town of Marshfield tried to heal. But how do you heal from something like that? The Schmidt name became a shadow. The house where it all happened sat empty for years. A silent monument to a family torn apart by blood and betrayal. People driving by would lower their voices, as if speaking too loudly near it might wake something best left sleeping. Some said Thomas got what he deserved. Others said Harold did too, that his lies, his selfish choices, had created a monster. But one thing everyone agreed on: the line between guilt and innocence had never felt thinner. The case wasn't just about one man's madness. It was about how betrayal festers, how it grows in the dark until it becomes something unrecognizable. Thomas Schmidt didn't walk into that house as a stranger. He walked in as family, and that made it all the more horrifying. After the trial ended and Thomas Schmidt was locked away for life, Marshfield tried to return to normal. But how do you return to normal when something like that happens on your doorstep? When an entire family is erased in one night and the man responsible shares their last name. The Schmidt farmhouse stood alone on County Road 12. Its paint peeling, its windows dark. No one wanted to go near it. The police had finished their investigation, but even after the crime scene tape came down, locals swore the house didn't feel empty. The smell of smoke, dried blood, and dust clung to the walls long after the cleaners had done their work. The neighbors said it was like the house itself refused to let go. For a while, it sat untouched. A for sale sign went up, but no one called. Not a single offer. Every real estate agent in town said the same thing. The moment people stepped inside, they felt it. The air heavy. The floors cold. One agent told a reporter that she heard something upstairs. Soft footsteps. Even though the rooms were empty. She never went back. People began to whisper that the Schmidt house was cursed. That the land had soaked up too much pain to ever feel clean again. Teenagers dared each other to sneak in at night, bringing flashlights and cameras. Some swore they saw lights flicker in the windows. Others claimed to hear voices, faint crying, a woman's whisper, a child's laugh cut short. The police dismissed it as imagination, but fear has a way of spreading faster than reason. By the late 80s, the farmhouse had become a local legend. Parents told their kids to stay away, not because of ghosts, but because of what the house stood for. It was a reminder of betrayal, of broken blood ties, of how evil doesn't always wear a stranger's face. It can come from the person who once shared your childhood bed, the person who once promised to protect you. Then one night in 1991, something happened. A fire broke out on the property, a blaze so fierce it could be seen from miles away. By the time firefighters arrived, the structure was gone. Only the stone foundation remained, blackened and broken. The official report listed the cause as accidental electrical failure, but no one in Marshfield believed that. There hadn't been electricity running to the property in years. Some said it was arson, that someone wanted to erase the last piece of the tragedy. Others whispered something darker, that the house had finally burned itself out, tired of carrying the memories it held inside. After the fire, the land was left vacant. Grass grew over the ashes. The wind moved through it like it was mourning. For a long time, no one touched it. Then, a decade later, a developer bought the property. Plans for new housing were drawn up, but every time construction began, something went wrong. Machinery would break down. Foundations would crack. Workers reported feeling watched. A few refused to go back. The project was abandoned after that. Today, if you drive past what used to be the Schmidt property, there's nothing there. Just an empty field, a scattering of old stones, and a faint path where the front porch used to be. But the people who've lived in Marshfield long enough will tell you that sometimes, late at night, when the air is still and the moonlight hits just right, you can see something in that field. A flicker, a shape, like a house standing where no house exists anymore. Those who believe in ghosts say it's the family, trapped in the moment they died, forever repeating that silent night. Those who don't believe say it's just the past, echoing, refusing to be forgotten. But either way, everyone agrees on one thing: the Schmidt tragedy changed the town forever. For years after, neighbors locked their doors earlier. Parents checked in on their kids twice before bed. The local school held assemblies about conflict and forgiveness, using the Schmidt case as a grim warning. Even the pastor at St. Mary's Church began including sermons about the dangers of holding on to anger. He said, "When hatred finds a home in your heart, it becomes a ghost that lives longer than you do." People wanted to forget. They tried to build over the pain, to bury it under the routines of daily life. But the thing about trauma is that it doesn't disappear. It lingers, reshaping everything it touches. For the people of Marshfield, the massacre became more than a story. It became a mirror, a reflection of how easily love can twist into something unrecognizable when guilt and vengeance take root. Some of Harold's old friends kept visiting the graves. 5 small headstones lined neatly beside each other. They'd leave flowers, toys, or small notes written in shaky handwriting. One note, left anonymously years later, read, "You didn't deserve this, but maybe you knew it was coming." That sentence captured what everyone felt, but no one dared to say. Deep down, the town couldn't decide who the true victim was. Was it the family who lost their lives, or was it Thomas, a man twisted by betrayal until he became something monstrous? Or was it both? Over time, the Schmidt story faded from newspapers, but never from memory. The people who lived through it could still point to the place, still tell you exactly where the house once stood. Some say you can still find shards of burnt wood buried under the soil, fragments of a life that was supposed to be peaceful. And even now, decades later, when the wind sweeps across that empty field, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke, the people of Marshfield know the story of the Schmidt family isn't over. It lives on in whispers, in nightmares, in the uneasy silence that falls whenever someone says their name.